how do we take care of our perennials and shrubs during the winter?
It's always good to be prepared.
Sure.
And gardeners always, we're like farmers, we always watch the weather forecast.
Right.
So there are some things though you can do to be prepared. And the first thing that I would like to do, or I do usually in my own garden, is to mulch. Mulch things really good. And they say to wait until the ground begins to get a little cold before you do that for some reason. I'm not sure on why you do that. But you put the mulch down and you don't cover the crowns of the perennials, obviously.
Right.
And you don't volcano mulch around the trunks of trees and shrubs. Bark's not made to go below ground,
Right.
Chris. So it doesn't like it. So don't do that. So make kind of a well. And then keep your plants watered during the winter because we do have dry spells. And it's always better when a plant has sufficient water when we have really cold winds, particularly on evergreens, because the winds can desiccate, you know, the foliage, pull the moisture out. So it's always good to keep things watered. And that's something I think gardeners sometimes forget because we don't think about that in the winter.
That's right, I agree with that.
But we can have dry weather.
Yeah.
It's always a good idea to remove, you know, the old diseased portions of plants and to take some of the canopies off and get rid of that. Gets rid of your pathogens and insects and things. And the other thing you can do, like I say, watch the weather. Yeah. And have on hand, because we could have one of those Arctic blasts again. Whatever the Farmer's Almanac says, you know, last winter we had some really, really, really cold weather that really did some damage on plants. And this year, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to congregate a bunch of blankets, and you don't use plastic. It doesn't really do a whole lot of good. And you need blankets and cheesecloth and row covers. And if you have big buckets or big tubs, I have some big nursery containers, you know, that I can flip over on the smaller mid-sized shrubs and things, and then cover that with a blanket. And make sure you do it before the sun goes down or late in the day because you can catch some of that ground heat.
Got it.
And always, and this is something that is hard sometimes to do, especially if you ain't got a big enough blanket, is to get it all the way to the ground. And
good, because I was going to ask you about that, right?
Because you're capturing as much heat as you can from the ground and the late afternoon, you know, heat. And the first thing you do in the morning, though, is obviously if it gets above freezing, the sun comes out, you're going to have to take all that stuff off because it will do some damage, you know, to the foliage. So you can use cardboard boxes. I've done that. You can use, like I say, old nursery containers. You can even use old coolers, bed sheets, you know, light drop cloths, that kind of thing. And secure the edges, water thoroughly, you know, before that, you know, if you know bad weather's coming. But the one thing that we have experienced that you really just can't seem, I mean, not a lot you can do is, last winter we had a sudden drop.
Yes, we did.
Really, really fast. And the more sudden that drop is and the longer it stays down like it did in the negative temperatures, Fahrenheit, the more damage it's going to do because plants are just not acclimated to that quick of a drop. You know, the thing about going into the fall is you kind of gradually, plants get a little acclimated, but when you have that crazy weather, you just need to be out there with all kind of stuff trying to protect. And then don't feel bad if it doesn't work, because I had a gardenia that had already been knocked back to the ground one time, and then last winter, here it came again, and so I covered that thing up. I mean, its top was already dead. I thought, well, I'm gonna cover up the base. It still killed it.
So what did you cover it up with?
Well, I had a big nursery. Well, see, the crown, you know, they're about that big with the, you know, stems coming up. So, and it was dead, so I cut all that off. And then I put my little mulch around it, and then I had a big old nursery container.
Oh, so you can.
It's a big tub, actually. Like, you know, cattlemen feed their cows, you know, get that kind of stuff. So I had several of those. And then I put several blankets over that, and then I put bricks around if there's a wind. Still killed it.
Still killed it.
Still killed it. I kept waiting.
That's a lot of work.
Well, I know it is. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of mess to have to keep up with. But the other thing, and I know in orchards, citrus orchards and things, they use big heaters. You know, there's big gas heaters they put out there too, especially if things are blooming, to keep those blooms from freezing. And that's real critical time, you know, for fruit set. So you can do something like that. You can, if you've got, you know it's going to get extreme, and let's say you are on the borderline with maybe a Meyer lemon or a Sasanqua camellia or something that you know is really borderline. I have made a framework. You're talking about a big shrub. So make some kind of framework. You can use old PVC pipe, or you can just get old bean poles or whatever and make sort of a pyramid. especially if you're going to have falling precipitation or freezing rain, because you know that's heavy.
Right.
And if you could get a pyramidal shape over your shrub, that will help it kind of maybe slide off, you know, or the snow fall off, or it'll help anyway.
Okay.
And then you can put a little light bulb in there, an incandescent. Don't use LEDs; they don't get hot enough. But put an incandescent bulb in there. If it's not so far, you can, you know, run an extension cord, and that definitely helps.
It helps.
It does. Now, don't burn the place down.
Right.
You know, don't put it next to the blanket or the cardboard box, obviously. And I've even used old Christmas lights.
Oh.
You know the old bulb, the old incandescent bulbs.
Right.
they're coming back in style now. You notice?
I've seen a lot of those lately.
Yeah. And the old LED lights, you know, that don't work. So get the big old Christmas lights, and that definitely puts off some heat. You know, if you had a fairly good sized shrub, and you really may not even have to cover it if it's not going to get really, really, really cold weather with the wind blowing. Of course, if it is, you'd want to cover it to catch that heat. But you can do that. I have done that, and hadn't burned anything down yet. So be really careful.
So you got to be careful. So, you know, you're talking about the structures, right? So what about structures for foundation planting? So you have a roof, you got ice, you got snow. I mean, could you build something like that to cover?
Yeah. Conceivably, you certainly could. You know, and further north, I'm sure they have a lot more, you know, that kind of situation. Down here, we don't get a lot of heavy snow. But up there, if you got like some foundation plants, you can build frameworks out of 2x4s, or like I was talking about the pyramids, and then just, you know, cover that with a blanket, or you can cover it with even plastic, but you don't want the plastic to touch the plant because you get that cold effect. But yeah, you can build these little frames of pyramidal kind of frames, and then just, I guess, store them during the summertime somewhere. But it's the idea is to keep that slides off of the roof. You know, the snow and the ice where falling and crushing, you know, your foundation plantings.
Right.
So you want to build something that it will hit and maybe keep it from crushing, or help it to slide off.
Okay. Let's go over this one last point. So remove the weeds, right?
Yeah. I think it's a good idea to get rid of all the old weeds, because you know, you don't want a bunch of old tall weeds around something you're covering up with a tent, because you got you could have insects in there, you know, and they're going to eat your plant up, and you don't even know it. Take the cloth off in the morning and there's no lead. Not seriously. But anyway, yeah, it's always a good idea to clean up the garden in the fall. And to get the plant residue up and remove the diseased limbs or whatever, and do that kind of pruning. You know. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. The winterizing fertilizers.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
They have done, apparently, used to, we always said, Chris, you don't fertilize in the late summer, you know, you cause new growth, it'll be tender for the cool. Now, though, they're saying, there's new research saying that the timing is really significant. Because it's a good thing. They found out plants can utilize nutrients, even deciduous plants, because they store that in their roots, and then they pull on those reserves for the spring and the root growth during the winter, and to do it after the first freeze.
After the first freeze.
Yeah, so that way the growth has really slowed down. Even evergreens, you know, the growth is really slowed down after the weather gets really cold and you get those first few killing frost or freezes. Then the metabolism of that plant has slowed down. So of course, deciduous plants don't even have any leaves. So they're not going to put any new growth. What you don't want to do is put it like now, when we're still having 80-degree days, or when it's still real sunny, bright, warm days. Because if you put a lot of, like a complete fertilizer, which is typically a winterizing fertilizer, you know, they say just a complete fertilizer is good, or high in potassium, because it promotes root growth.
Got it.
So slow release is even better. But to just wait until it's colder weather, because then you won't get that flush of new growth that could be more susceptible on your evergreens to the cold. So I'm gonna, after the first freeze, I'm gonna put some winterizing fertilizer out.
And then you're gonna come back and tell us how that works.
I will.
Dr.
Maybe
Kelly.
I'll resuscitate that dead gardenia.
Maybe you can do that too, right? Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. That's good information. Good information. We appreciate that.